Okay,
since his
this
character
is
had
a
stated
video from
multiple
Star Wars.
times how he craved revenge
It's
against
gonna
the man
be
that took everything from him.
random uploads
Sorcerer
for
defended his
a new
character's
character.
actions with something
I
that
ain't
sounded
showing
very
you
similar to
my other
is what our
character
character
in
would
case
do. And
you know,
Rogue told him
doing
that
random
this is how our
weird
characters
ass
would
thing.
react to his actions, and there were consequences to being a blabbermouth. Dungeon Master did warn Rogue and I that this would mean that in the next session, Sorcerer could have little to no playtime, since the dinner portion and our plans to sneak around the castle would take up a majority of the session. The session ended with Rogue and I about to call a meeting with Paladin and our wizard. The next morning, Sorcerer had typed a long message in the Discord chat about how he didn't feel like it was fair that he would be excluded from a plotline this important, and wanted to be there to get XP like the rest of us. I'm starting to feel bad. I don't want to exclude Sorcerer from the activities, but at the same time, he doesn't see any fault in him constantly announcing our character's secrets and putting them at a disadvantage. And the worst part is, he never said that he wouldn't do it if we took him to the king's dinner with us, which makes me even more hesitant to bring him. Rogue is adamant about not telling his character anything, but I don't want to make him sit out an entire session. What should I do? I have 2 weeks to make a choice on whether or not my character will tell Sorcerer about the invitation. Well, that certainly sounds like a predicament. I can understand where OP is coming from. On one hand, you don't want to exclude a player from something pivotal to the game's story. But on the other, due to his character's past behavior, don't feel comfortable with bringing him along. It does make sense in character that they would be a bit wary about bringing the Sorcerer along. And in fairness, he put that
Reminded me
distrust
a little
on
bit
himself.
without the face makeup.
Perhaps there is a solution
lighter
where
skin.
both parties could be satisfied.
It looks like Chick-fil-A
Because,
from
as I take it,
WWE.
Sorcerer's character is kind of like an innocent, clueless, childlike maturity of a character. A lovable, yet fumbling idiot. Much like a certain barbarian of a certain popular anime and D&D campaign. Perhaps, the Dungeon Master could have the Sorcerer go on his own little misadventure during the dinner party scenes, and cut back and forth between them. Or, the party could sit him down and try to drive the importance of keeping his mouth shut through his thick skull, and risk some hijinks happening during the dinner party. Or, you could all just talk above table, and figure out a way, and agree to something that would guarantee that the Sorcerer wouldn't blow the whole thing out of the water. In any case, communication is key here, and that is the main suggestion I would give. Though, what would be some suggestions you guys would give OP for this situation? Let's move on. Failed Betrayal, Utter Idiocy, by Reddit user Redman1986. Been a bit since I posted here, and thought I might share this one. This one gets in the weeds a bit about how Warhammer 40k works, but should be digestible. I was doing a 3-shot of Deathwatch, just a single extended mission to scratch a 40k itch. I had my 4-man team make some veteran space marines, ended up with a Stormlord, a Karsharadon, an Ultramarine, and a faux Crimson Fist. I say faux because the guy playing him messaged me about wanting to be a secret Alpha Legionnaire that infiltrated the Crimson Fist chapter and ended up getting a Deathwatch secondment. I thought this was a really cool idea and worked with him to get it going. We gave him a background package, Tainted Gene Seed, to explain any differences, and did some work to give him some unique chapter orders. I told him a bit more about my intended plot so he could pick a good time to do a betrayal, if he wanted to do one at all, and carried on, very excited for this. Well, it didn't go great. 2 turns into the first combat, literally within 20 minutes of starting the first session, he turns and opens fire on the Ultramarine. He literally yelled, "Haha, I'm a secret Alpha Legion Marine. Die, loyalist scum." He ended up rolling dog crap and hit him only once with his storm bolter, doing almost chip damage against the Ultramarines' Artificer armor. Ultramarine gets his turn, pivots, and one-shotted him with a plasma cannon. The remaining players are confused, and Alpha Legion player was upset, as was I. Alpha Legion player went off mic, and I explained, "Listen, I thought this would be a cool twist, except it turns out that guy is an effing idiot. Can we just carry on? I worked hard on this." The other players agreed, and eventually
Not gonna skip
thought it
any
was quite
dialogue for
funny.
you guys,
I told Alpha Legion player that he
so
could
you
keep
can
playing
actually
with the
get
same character,
to
just a real Crimson Fist this time.
games like.
He got drop-potted in as, quote, reinforcement, and they never talked about the Chaos Space Marine that infiltrated their squad. Well, sometimes
It's about
an
how to
idea
re-
can be good on paper, but the execution of it can flop, especially if the player playing the secret Alpha Legion is too eager to reveal his betrayal, and does so in the first combat encounter. It probably would have been a lot cooler if he waited until the last session to make that revelation, giving it a much larger impact. At least OP was able to salvage this, and even bring that player back in.
And
But
I'll
this
try
time,
to get
with no secret backstabbing.
Overwatch
On to the next one.
video up.
New player doesn't understand that just because you encounter it doesn't mean you should fight it. By Reddit user Nicholas Bessie. I run an experienced group for several years of the same 4 people. We recently added a new guy that has experience with Adventure League, but wanted to join our group as they know one of the longtime players. The setup: Dragonlance alternate timeline. The group is level 14, with a good mix of support, DPS, and tank. The new player is a rogue, kind of cocky, and a little murder hobo-ish, which doesn't really fly in the group and setting, or my dungeon mastering style. So they're going after what they think could be a dragon orb, and
Sorry
while
if I'm
traveling,
skipping
they see a group
dialogue.
of undead in the road ahead, going in the same direction as the group. They recon, and find out it's the Knight of the Rose in black burnt armor,
Yeah, you'll be
clearly
able to
undead,
skip
with
some
13 other
portions of
skeletons
dialogue.
armed. Augury spell tells the group that it's a bad idea to F with them, but they decided to, quote, test the waters and see what they are up against. Now the players know that it's probably Lord Soth, and the characters have heard about him and his powers, casting Ice Wall, Fireballs, and speaking words that snuff out life force. The group does what they call recon combat. If they feel the threat is serious, and maybe too much, they go in for one round, blow their load, and then run away based on the results of round 1. So they set up and get ready for an ambush, and it doesn't go well for round 1. None of the skeleton guards go down. Spells are bouncing off Soth, and they get a giant hellfire orb to the face, which hurts a lot. The group decides to retreat, except the rogue, who has the highest initiative. The rogue pops a potion of invisibility and move/dashes towards Soth. The rest of the party don't know this because he is invisible, and they continue to retreat. Soth, being Soth,
Oops, wrong
easily
way.
spots the rogue and commands him to die, which he does. The guy playing the rogue throws his dice and says, "GMs are supposed to let players win, and this is why I play in the Adventure League." He then gets up and storms out. The rest of the group is quiet for a while, but that's about it. The long-term player who knew him sent him some texts and called him, and the dude calmed down and wants to rejoin the party, but I'm not having him back at the table. Maybe not a terrible horror story, but I thought it might fit. Yeah, with the party being... The long-term player who knew him sent him some texts and called him, and the dude calmed down and wants to rejoin the party. But I'm not having him back at the table.
Sorry about
Maybe
that.
not a terrible horror
Do
story,
something.
but I thought it might fit.
You're a tasty snack, aren't you, mister?
What? Are you?
Talk to my Quaker Rice Crisp? I am. They're crispy, crunchy.
Yeah, with the party being very careful about the encounter, and the characters hearing about Lord Soft, it was a bit of a cocky move on the Rogue's part to go in alone after the party made the plan to strike and run away. Then, for that player to act like that, and throw a tantrum after his character died. I mean, what was he expecting by going alone against a challenge rating 19 enemy, with all of those skeletons with him? Now, if I were the Dungeon Master here, I would give the player one more chance, as I'm a believer in second chances. And perhaps, after talking to him, the player would act better. Though, that's just me, and I can completely understand why the Dungeon Master doesn't want him to come back. Though, what would you guys do if you were the DM here? Let's move on to the next post. The Dungeon Master either booted me out or ended the game because my Oath of Devotion Paladin was high level enough to immunize the party against charm effects. By Reddit user Earth Seraph Edna. I joined the 5th edition pickup game online earlier. I joined this game because, unlike most other 5th edition pickup games, it actually started at a high level. I chose the Oath of Devotion because I was trying out the 2024 material, much belatedly. The Dungeon Master did not give out much of a premise, and simply promised a generic D&D adventure. I do not know how experienced the Dungeon Master was with 5th edition. They could have been new, or they could have been experienced. In the very first scene, we were standing before the Queen of a generic fantasy kingdom in a generic fantasy world. After some basic introductions, the Dungeon Master had the Queen reveal that she was, in fact, some demonic succubus queen. The Archfiend proceeded to automatically charm everyone in the room, with no saving throws allowed. The Dungeon Master specifically, repeatedly, used the word charm. I pointed out that, as an Oath of Devotion Paladin, my allies within 10 feet and I were immune to being charmed. There was no further dialogue from there, whether in or out of character. Just a minute or so later, the Discord server was gone from my list, and the Dungeon Master was blocking me. In other words, the Dungeon Master either booted me out, or simply deleted the server, and ghosted everyone. How could this have been handled more aptly? Well, it sounds to me like the Dungeon Master didn't take that class ability into consideration, and the whole thing with the party getting charmed was something that he was dependent on for the session to start. So instead of pivoting and trying to come up with something else on the fly, the Dungeon Master panicked and just kicked and blocked OP. At least it was only a pickup game, and the worst thing that happened to OP is that he lost his plans for a night. Plus, now, he has a slightly humorous story to tell. Let's move on. Kicked from group of 1 year for being, quote, too young to stream. By Reddit user Concord Grapes. For reference, I, 18 years of age, have been playing with a D&D group since around May of 2023, with a group of 6 people, ranging from 22 to 30. Just last night, I'd gotten a call from our Dungeon Master, saying that they wanted to start streaming our games, something they've been talking about for a few months until this point, and that they didn't feel comfortable doing so, since they drink and make dirty jokes with someone so young, especially with how canceling is these days, etc., etc. This has never been a problem for me, as I just didn't drink and still had a fun time, especially since this was my first ever D&D group, and I'd fallen in love with both the game and these goofballs. Alongside this, he'd said, "I don't know if this group is for you. It's nothing against you personally, and I'm sorry." Just feels like a huge kick in the balls to have my first ever group of almost a year at this point just throw me out for being too young for them to make a stream out of it. It generally makes me feel like I'd effed up somewhere down the line, and they just never told me, and that's why I'm being kicked, and that they're just using my age as an excuse. That said, I have no way of really knowing anymore, so all I can do is just move on and reflect on what I can do better. Edit. Clarifying a few things because there have been a few wars in the comments, and just some added context. This is in the US, and were private sessions, usually at our DM's place. Yes, I was 17 when I first started playing with them. I am female, but I'm not the only woman at the table, as there were 2 others. I was overall completely left out of the conversation when it came to the streaming, and straight blindsided about being kicked out. Streaming talk was in complete passing, and seemed like shower thoughts when I was at the table, and they never gave me a whisper about problems with me being 18 conflicting with the streaming. Lastly, the biggest slap in the face was I'd been planning a 2-shot for the group for the last 2 months. I'm talking hand-picked specific soundtracks, dungeon layouts, a lot of contained story beats, and scenarios/enemies to let the players take advantage of their characters' abilities. I put a lot of work into the damn thing, with good advice from the DM that would have taken place the next session before I was given the news. Yeah, that is a pretty messed up thing for the group to do to OP. Perhaps OP did do something that the group didn't like, and they were just using streaming as an excuse to boot her. But I don't really think that's the case here. I think the fact that everyone else at the table would drink while playing the game was the issue, and the Dungeon Master probably thought that viewers of the stream wouldn't like the optics of them drinking around a player that isn't old enough to drink, or something like that. So I would tell OP not to think too hard on whether she did something wrong. It just sounds like the group wants to be the next Critical Role or Dimension 20, and decided to toss you to the side to get there, which in my mind is super scummy. So here's hoping that this didn't ruin D&D for OP, and that she finds another group to play with that is a bit more considerate. On to the next one. Player fishes on WoW during my sessions. By Reddit user Salem's Lot 19. I host 2.5-hour long weekly D&D 5th edition sessions on Discord. 4 players, including one of whom is my wife. Another is Fisher, Fisher's fiance, and an old friend of Fisher's fiance. Fisher claims fishing in WoW helps him zone out less, and claims he's only fishing. I've known this man for 18 years, over half my life, amongst my oldest friends, yada yada. But he's got the WoW bug right now, and is raiding on WoW's classic season of Discovery, seriously, 4 to 5 times every few days. I'm also the kind of person who obsesses over things, instead of just liking them. But those raids last for as long as my sessions do, and he gives them his undivided attention. Talks about parsing, and all that min-max nonsense MMO raiders always do. Yet, I can't even get him to not fish on that blasted game during our scheduled times. It's really just demoralizing, as I put in a lot of effort for these sessions, as all DMs do. But none of my players actually pay for anything to play, versus me, who pays for a World Anvil, where I post detailed session reports, Incarnate for the
This
next
will be the
etc.
last task.
And even though we are in his character arc in game, literally in the hometown
Well,
of
the
his
2
deity
guys,
and
not the
ancestors
girl.
that we have been trying to get to for 3 months now, I just don't feel like he's focusing on the game. We're running on over a year of weekly sessions, only broken up by a side campaign Fisher actually DMs, partially a plot to get him to fully focus on the game. I obviously don't want to blow up on him, but being mid-sentence into my session and seeing, quote, Fisher has launched World of Warcraft is like a notification telling me the player whose arc we are in is not really feeling immersed or interested. And it is frustrating to get my mind back on track and keep the game going sometimes because of it. Mainly just looking for advice. Am I overreacting? Would y'all be cool with this at your tables? Edit. Fishing in WoW is essentially a 0 to 20 second minigame where you watch a bobber for movement and a little sound notification and click it within a second. It's like activating a 20-second QuickTime event where the QuickTime event trigger time is randomized. I mean, even if the Fisher player can both play D&D and the World of Warcraft fishing minigame at the same time, it's still a bit rude to do so, while everyone else is focusing on the game that the Dungeon Master has spent time working on for him to play, especially during Fisher's character's story arc. If I was OP, I would talk to the Fisher player and politely ask him to not play WoW while you are all playing D&D. Even if he says that he can multitask, I would bring up how it bothers you and actually distracts you from performing as a Dungeon Master. Though, what would you all suggest here? But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, especially the ones who roll a crit on that like button, and I hope that your games remain horror story free. Until next time.
Cats lose their cool for Temptation's creamy parade.
Refresh your senses with a burst of cherry flavor in Mountain Dew Code Red. Do the do.
Hey everybody, and welcome to D&D Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a dungeon master and a player that clash with each other so much that it eventually escalates into a fist fight. A story about a murder hobo player that decides to PvP his party, and much more. But before we get into those, a message from Lucky, the like and comment kitty.
Okay.
Thanks, Lucky. But with that said, let's get into some D&D horror stories. Hands Are Thrown Over D&D Game by Reddit user, College D&D Fan. So I play D&D in an RPG club at my local game store near the college. Our group would get together on Wednesday after our classes were done and play our campaign.
The Chad's
This
literally right
campaign
here. You
included
can
me,
see at the bottom.
the
of
DM, a pacifist, a normal guy, a normal girl, a freshman girl who is just getting into D&D, and her boyfriend, a 30-something-year-old grognard. Most of us went to the said college, except for Grognard and DM. Now, Grognard was a hyper-min-maxed human fighter, and was kind of smug about everyone else's character, except his girlfriend's, quote, sexy and badass tiefling druid, and would jab at us playfully
This
about
motherfucker.
how weak our characters were.
These two.
This wasn't a big problem, as you'd think, as we'd roast his character too. But he would also constantly give tips to the Dungeon Master about how he could, quote, improve the campaign by, for example, giving us more freedom to explore the dungeons in Everworld. Grognard was big on exploration and dungeon crawling, and Dungeon Master was, in all fairness, kind of railroady. This led to quite a few passive-aggressive arguments between the Dungeon Master and Grognard.
Okay, that's
Dungeon
gonna
Master
better
took an
be.
insane amount